Alrighty. So, one of the big, frequently asked questions I've gotten is what to do with motes. How do we spend them effectively to get the most out of them? You know, what should I invest in first versus not? So, I guess first thing we're going to talk about is how to just farm motes in the first place. So, motes are a currency item. They are all untradeable. So, the way to go out and the way to get them is just go out and play the game. Simple as that. Go kill stuff. Enemies will have higher mote drop chances based on their level relative to you, so higher level is better. They will have more drop chance if they are multi-classed, so if they have 2 or 3 classes, they get a multiplier to their drop rate. If they are flagged as a raid mob, they get another multiplier on top of that. And then based on the difficulty setting of the zone, so higher difficulty equals better. Now on difficulty 0, you'll only see very, very basic motes, tier 1, maybe tier 2 if you're lucky. Playing on difficulty 4, you're going to see mostly tier 5 motes, with 6s maybe dropping when you get a little lucky. Though 7 and above become very rare. Like, for example, despite weeks on pre-order beta and weeks on closed beta, I have never dropped a tier 10 mote myself. So anything above tier 6 gets to be prohibitively rare. And likewise, because motes are just a product of putting hours into the game, obviously how much you value motes and how much you kind of scrutinize your usage is really going to depend on how many motes you're farming at any given time. If you're only able to play five hours a week, then the number of motes you get obviously is going to require a little bit more thought than somebody who plays 5 to 8 hours a day and is just rolling in motes. Yeah, the 4-man difficulty 4 hate fear farming. Yeah, definitely a very, very strong way to farm large quantities of motes while also getting large quantities of gear drop at the same time. Also worth noting, by the way, that tier 5 motes will not drop on anything lower than level 20. So, first floor of Befallen, sorry. You gotta, if you're gonna go grinding in Befallen, you gotta go past the first floor. You gotta go a little deeper into the dungeon to see the good motes. That there is a level floor there. And yeah, difficulty 4 is basically mandatory for high tier mote farming. Really, the difficulty difference between D3 and D4 is pretty minor anyway. So if you can do D3, just do D4. Now, as far as what to actually spend motes on, well, we have 2 basic options: spells and equipment. And what your priority is going to depend largely on what your class loadout is and what your playstyle is. And what sort of content you're trying to do or what you're trying to accomplish. So your personal needs are going to be different from mine because you're not playing the same character I am. And you probably play the game differently than I do. And that's okay. But what we're going to try to do here is give you the tools to put together your own priority list to get the most out of the resources you have at hand. So we'll look at gear first. Now, gear has the advantage. You can go in, do a zone at difficulty 4. The gear will drop at +4, maybe +5 if you're a little lucky. And you can merge those items together. So something like, say, a dark metal holy water sprinkler, just drops in hate. So I go grind hate on difficulty 4 for a while. I'll probably see 1 or 2 of these drop over the course of a zone clear. It's not a super rare item. So I could just build this thing up over time by clearing the zone over and over, just grinding for XP or whatever. Or I could, other option, I could plug motes into it if I wanted to. And not all items work that way, though. Let's say I want to build up my Fiery Avenger. Well, this is a quest item. It only comes at +0. So if I wanted to get this thing to a high tier, I could do the quest hundreds of times. I'm not that masochistic. So on something like the Fiery Avenger, where the amount of time it takes to do the quest is prohibitive, there maybe you'd be better served spending the motes, build the thing up to, let's say, 4 or 5 or 6, and then, let's say, mote it to 6, make a second copy, mote that to 6, fuse them together, and you get a tier 7. Because the thing about motes, the value per mote on an item starts to drop off hard in the upper echelons of upgrade tiers. So, like this holy water sprinkler right here at +6, I would need a tier 7 mote to upgrade this any further. A tier 7 mote is going to give it 7 XP per mote. So, to get 62 XP, I would need 9 tier 7 motes, which would give it 63 points and bump it up to +7. I have never dropped that many tier 7 motes between open and closed beta. Not even close. I think I've dropped like 2 or 3 combined over weeks of play. So waiting for tier 7 motes to drop seems prohibitive. Other option, motes can be manufactured up to +8 by combining lower tier motes. So we could take 2 6s and put those together to get a tier 7. Tier 6s are already reasonably rare. Not giga rare, like 7 and above, but rare enough that when you drop one, you notice it. So to get 9 tier 6s, or excuse me, to get 9 tier 7s, we would need 18 tier 6s, because you trade 2 to get 1 of the next tier. So 18 tier 6s. That still feels a little prohibitive. It would take a decent chunk of playtime to drop that many tier 6s. Or we could fuse together a bunch of tier 5s. Again, it's 2 for 1, so 18 tier 6s would require 36 tier 5s. Again, tier 5s are common when playing at difficulty 4, but that's still a lot. So, we could do it. It might not feel good, but we could do it. And that's where you're going to need to do your own personal cost-benefit analysis to decide if the extra stats at that point are worth the investment. Because remember, stat growth on an item is linear. The amount of stats you get going from the base item to +1 is the same amount of stats you get going from +9 up to +10. Each of those, give or take for some rounding, that's all linear. So the growth becomes, or the cost of growth becomes exponential. The growth itself stays linear. So consider that, don't go into the game expecting you're going to have +10 items off the bat. You're not. That is going to take a substantial amount of effort however you do it. Even if you're grinding an item drop that drops at +4, you're still going to need 64 copies of that item to get it to +10. That is not going to happen immediately. Rome was not built in a day. So keep that in mind when deciding on your own personal order of operations and your own cost-benefit analysis. How much is 2 extra AC worth? How much is 1 stamina, 1 wisdom really worth to you versus the other plethora of things you could do with that same resource? And other thing to note is items do gain stats at, like, say, the halfway point. So if we go into storage here and we pull out 2 major motes. Oh, wait, we can't use majors on this, on that item. That's already on +5. Let's see, do we have something on, like, +4? We have a... let's see here. Here we go. This Brewer's Mesh Cloak. That's already halfway through. Dang. How about... All right, this Triumphant Mask. We'll use this as a basis. If we pull out... So, it would take 4 major motes to upgrade this to +5. So we're going to put 2 in here. And we should see the save magic jump by a point. That should be the only thing that changes at this stage. Yep. Everything else stayed the same, but the magic jumped by a point. Because what's really happening is each full tier of upgrade is a 10% upgrade on a stat with a minimum of +1 to each attribute that the thing has. So when you see a particular attribute start at 20, each full tier upgrade will give it +2, and each halfway point will give it +1. So if we put the other 2 major motes in here, we'll see the AC will jump to 15, the attributes will jump to 12, and magic will go up by another point. And there we go. Also, each full upgrade tier gives it 1 save void, which does not currently do anything. There are no void-based effects in the game yet. So we'll find out the value of that stat at some point in the future. So that's the equipment side. What about spells? Now, spells, on one hand, cannot be dropped at plus bonuses. Maybe if we get ancient spells or something in the future, maybe things will work a little differently. But for now, at least, all spells only exist in tier 0 form by default. You can't buy multiple copies of a spell scroll off a vendor to combine them. That doesn't work. Spells start at tier 0, and you only upgrade via motes. But, whereas equipment mote cost is exponential, spell mote cost remains consistent. So you put a... Let's go to Cure Disease here. Not a spell I would necessarily recommend upgrading, but we'll use it for upgrade purposes. If I have any So do I have enough low tier motes to actually, yeah. So we take one infinitesimal mote in here, and it bumps up to tier 1. And if I had a minor mote, I would use the minor mote, but I don't. So, one lesser mote, then takes it halfway to tier 2. One more lesser takes it to tier 3. And we only need one tier 4 to take it to tier 4. If I had a major still, one major would take it to tier 5, etc. So, it is cheaper to upgrade spells. But boy howdy, there are a lot of spells in the game, aren't there? So, what spells do you want to upgrade? And some people will say, hoard all of your motes for level 50, just upgrade your top tier spells. Some other people will say, upgrade as you go. And the both methodologies have logical arguments to make. I would be of the latter camp. I would say upgrade as you go to help facilitate the leveling process. And doubly so, if you have a particular class that you're going to level as one of your as your main class, and you're going to use that class then to power level alternate classes after the fact, all the spells in the leveling process of that class are going to get used again and again and again and again. When you drop back to level 10 to start leveling an alternate class, you don't have your level 50 spell anymore. You don't have superior healing anymore. You have light healing now. So those leveling spells do end up doing a lot of heavy lifting as you go. And, speaking as a paladin, for example, greater healing in particular does a lot of heavy lifting, because paladins get the spell at level 30, and they have to live with it until 46. So, look at what spells you're going to be using, how long you're going to be using them for, and then do your own cost-benefit analysis of, is that worth putting resources into, or is it better to just hold off for the top level? That's your decision to make. But let's take a look here through the spell book and see what kinds of spells get what kinds of upgrades and what is hypothetically worth upgrading or not. So as a paladin main with Cleric as my other main spellcasting class, the nukes we get are not amazing for the most part. The undead nukes are pretty okay, but the basic nukes are not amazing. So they're pretty low on my own personal totem pole of spells. And quick note here on buffs. The thing with buffs, other than proc buffs, which we'll get to in a minute, the potency of the spell does not increase with upgrades. Endure Cold here is going to give you the exact same amount of cold resistance at tier 10 that it gave you at tier 0. And that is by design. So the only things that are going to change when we upgrade this spell, the cast time is going to go down. Woo. The mana cost is going to go down. Not necessarily all that exciting for a spell you cast out of combat. And the duration is going to go up. Maybe interesting. So, short duration buffs in particular, stuff like, say, Boon of the Garrow or low to mid-tier haste spells, increasing the duration can be a big quality of life upgrade. Although, like, Alacrity, for example, just doesn't last very long. It's such a short duration spell, you might almost feel compulsed to keep it on your spell bar so you can recast it every 12 or 15 minutes or whatever it lasts. Or if you don't mind taking a quick breather every 12 to 15 minutes to swap the spell gem, can't recast the spell, oh, that's on you. That's, again, playstyle preference. The pacify spells, whether it be lull animal or vanilla lull or harmony, whatever, these have some extra functionality with Mote upgrades, because not only does the mana cost go down, the duration goes up, and the cast time goes down. The maximum level they affect goes up by 1 per upgrade. So if a pacify spell normally has a level cap of 55, upgrade it to tier 5, and it'll suddenly affect level 60 mobs. Very useful. Additionally, we look at things like desist here. We see that the resist adjust gets better with every upgrade tier. 15 points of resist adjust per upgrade tier. So at tier 6 it has a 90-point resist adjust. This line alone is awesome, because even a 50-point resist adjust is a lot. Historically, if a spell is meant to be kind of hard to resist, it'll have a 50-point resist adjust, as opposed to wizard lore spells that are meant to be almost unresistible have a minus 200 resist. So by the time you upgrade a spell to tier 10, it has a 150-point resist adjust, which means it is probably not getting resisted much, if at all, outside of some very unusual edge cases like the Eye of Vishan, who is notoriously magic resistant. But that is the exception rather than the rule. Likewise, Desist, being a stun spell, also gets its effective level increased by its upgrade tier. So normally has a level cap of 55. It is now tier 6. This would stun up to a level 61 mob. And if I took this all the way to tier 10, then I would be able to stun up to a level 65 mob. Though it's worth noting, in the context of current content for stuns specifically, the highest level mob in the game that is even conceptually stunnable is level 58 or 59. Anything 60 or above is going to be a major boss like Inaruk or Khazak-Thul or one of the Plane of Sky bosses. And those are all just flagged immune to stun anyway. But Kunark will come down the pipe eventually, so, that's a thing. Anyway, going through the spell book here. I want to also mention, Mote upgrades will not, generally speaking, save a bad spell. If the spell is bad, upgrade it all the way to tier 10, it'll probably still be bad. It'll probably just be less bad. On the other hand, it will turn a good spell into a great spell, as we're going to see. So going down the paladin, you know what? Let me actually swap my. No, I take it back. We'll stick with this spell list. We'll also mention kind of off the bat here, since we have the Wild Spirit spell. Pets get big bonuses from levels. The pet itself will physically gain a level for every upgrade tier on the spell, capped at your level -1. So ultimately, your pets can be level 49 instead of whatever their default level was from that spell. So some pet spells only have to go to like rank 5 to be maxed out. Others might have to go the distance to rank 10. Mage pets are just higher level than, say, enchanter pets by default. So we'll go down the list here and start looking at things like debuffs. Get a lot of benefit. Because not only is their resist adjust going to be become a thing, so they're easier to land, their duration goes up substantially. This is huge for things like slow, where suddenly it lands on the first try, and it lasts long enough you don't have to do it again. Huge, huge upgrade there, not having to re-slow a boss, or not having to stand there casting it 5 or 6 times, pulling aggro off the tank in the process, trying to land it. Cease and its big brother Desist. I want to talk about these two spells in particular, coming from a paladin's perspective. These are absolute S-rank spells by default. You get Cease at level 7, you get Desist at level 13. They last the whole game. You never replace them. There is no upgrade to those spells at this point in time. These are actually Luckland spells that we have out of era here in Legends. Two of the best spells in the Paladin spellbook, and you get them early on. I will always pump these up to tier 5 or 6, at least, right off the bat. Also, worth noting, Cease and Desist do have cooldown timers, as basically all stuns do. So, and they both operate on the same upgrade line in this regard. At tier 3, and again at tier 6, and then at tier 9, they will have their reuse time cut by 1 second, which for interrupting things like enemy heals or other enemy spells is huge. So yeah, I will take both of these spells to +6 as fast as physically possible. Basically, my first couple of tier 5 motes are going straight into Cease and Desist. Very, very, very high value spells here. As opposed to, like, Furor, which is just a very, very basic nuke. Would just give it a couple extra points of damage. I don't care, personally. Unfortunately, poor Yulp here has no reason to be upgraded. It costs 1 mana and has an infinite duration. There is nothing to improve on this spell. I mean, if you really want the cast time to go from half a second down to less than that, you do you, I guess. You know, they're your motes, spend them how you want, but I will personally not be upgrading Yulp. Now, for some of these low-level healing spells, you'll see I took light healing up to 4. Again, as a paladin, I have to live with light healing from level 10 all the way to level 20. So I threw a mote at it to at least get a little bit more mileage out of it. Also worth noting, by the way, as of this recording, healing values and damage values that are upgraded by motes are not demonstrated on the tooltips. That has not been implemented yet. That is coming soon, trademark. So, I'll tell you, though, that instead of healing for 65 HP, it heals for, like, 80 HP. Which makes it still not amazing when casting it at level 19, but, you know, it's better than nothing. Alright, we talked about LOL already. Blast of Frost, this is, you know, the Beast Lord version of Cease and Desist, basically, except it does damage. So, same rules apply. Very high value spell for Beast Lords, because upgrading it, it'll land more consistently because it'll get the resist adjust. It'll do a little bit more damage, and it'll affect higher target mobs. Very, very high value. Now, as I understand it, the damage value on damage shields is being contemplated to scale with upgrades. Right now, it doesn't. That might be implemented down the road, so that aspect of buffs might scale down the road. Right now, it doesn't. So, you know, we can only work with really what's implemented for now. So, damage shields might get some extra juice down the road. That's not a thing right now, though. Let's see. We'll talk about that nuke in a minute here. You know, going down here, you'll see I basically buffed every Beast Lord pet up to tier 5 because it was inexpensive. Gets it 5 extra levels. That's usually enough to keep the pet relevant while leveling without actually spending a lot of currency in the process. Instrument of Knife. All right, so one of the special cases with buffs being upgraded are proc buffs. This would be things like Instrument of Knife and Divine Might for Paladins, Call of Sky for Rangers, etc. The way these work, generally speaking, these are permanent duration buffs, so they don't have a duration to upgrade. You're casting them out of combat, so the cast time and the mana cost are basically irrelevant. But these do scale in effect with upgrade tier. For every 2 levels of upgrade on the spell, the proc itself will gain 1 upgrade tier. So I upgraded this to tier 8, which means it procs the tier 4 version of the effect. So instead of doing about 250 damage, it does a little north of 300 damage. So nice upgrade there. And I'll mention Instrument of Knife specifically as well. Very, very high value paladin spell. You get it at level 15. There is no upgrade to it. The alternative is Divine Might, which works on all targets, whereas Instrument of Knife is purely undead. So, very, very high value spell. I will definitely take this to tier 6 off the bat, as soon as I have the option to do so. Yeah, just remember, odd numbered upgrades don't really do anything on these. You gotta, if you take it to tier 5, you gotta take it to tier 6. If you take it to tier 7, keep going until you get to tier 8. It's the even numbered ranks that matter. So, going down the list here, we can find, again, healing spells, little bit more juice, little bit less mana. I took vanilla healing up to tier 6, which costs 4 tier 5 motes, by the way. And for a spell that, again, I have to live with for 10 levels, I might as well take a spell that feels underpowered and try to get a little bit more mileage out of it. Drowsy is... now, I never bothered to upgrade this. I really should have, actually. Beast Lords use this spell for a very long time. They don't get an upgrade for a long time. So, might as well drop some motes in there to make sure it lands and to give it enough duration to make sure it lasts even through a long slog of a fight, like, say, the Baron in Befallen, who will keep healing himself over and over and over and over again until you've blown through his life bar 4 or 5 times. Let's see. Going on down the line here. Hey, if you want your Spirit of Wolf to last a long time, here you go. Again, optional quality of life upgrade. Upgrading the spell will not make you run faster, but it'll make the spell last longer. So, if that has value to you, great. If not, skip it. One down. And you'll see good old vanilla stun that clerics get at 4. Also very, very high value spell. I did the same thing. I took it straight to rank 6 as soon as I picked it up. Yeah, greater healing. Took to tier 6 again. Paladins are stuck with this spell forever. One thing I had asked during one of the Insight streams that didn't get answered was if Dispel power is supposed to get upgraded via Mote upgrades. It does not appear to, but I have not gotten a word of God clarification on that. Dear devs, it would be cool if that were a thing, if upgrading the spell increased the effective caster level of the Dispel to give it more Dispel power. So you can dispel things like buffs cast by Eye of Vision. Would be neat. So that it would operate kind of like Bard's Jam Session that increases the effective caster level. Would be neat. I don't think it actually does that currently, but it would be a neat feature if it did. So, going on down the list here. Let's take a look at... Let's see, let's actually, do we have a higher tier? We don't have a higher, we're only 42 right now. So let's take a look at malaria real quick here. Let's actually prep malaria. Damage over time, disease. Let's actually throw a few motes at malaria for demonstration purposes. And we've got a nice... Let's see here. We'll take one of our greater motes. One greater mote takes a spell straight to tier 5. So we can see here that damage over time effects get, two major benefits. Not only is the damage per tick going to go up, again, that's not reflected on the tooltip yet, that hasn't been implemented yet, but the duration also goes up as well. Doesn't go up by a huge amount, but we do get, in this case, 3 extra ticks out of the spell, so very nice. In addition to lowering the mana cost, lowering the recovery time and the reuse time, and of course, adding at tier 5, we have a 75-point resist adjust, so this is probably going to land almost every time. And this kind of function right here is why heal over time spells get so much value. Let's look at Ethereal Cleansing for a moment. This is the one and only Paladin heal over time spell. Comes online at 44. And at tier 6, you can see we've dropped the mana cost from 150 down to 132. We've dropped the cast time from 1.5 down to 1.14. The duration has jumped all the way from 24 seconds up to 42 seconds. We're going from 4 ticks all the way up to 7 ticks. That's a 75% duration increase. Now, it's worth noting, by the way, spell durations in EverQuest must always be a multiple of 6 seconds, because 6 seconds is 1 server tick. So spell durations get rounded off to 6 seconds. With regards to upgrades, in this case, generally speaking, the spell will start rounding up fairly early, so you'll get that first extra tick kind of early in the upgrade process, but then you'll have to put a couple of tiers in before you get to the next rounding point on the next tick. So you might, on a spell, maybe you get your bonus tick at tier 2. You might not get another bonus tick until, say, tier 5 or 6. It's going to depend on what the base duration of the spell is, how that rounding works. And then also depending on if you've got a duration focus or if you have spellcasting reinforcement AAs, there can be a little bit of goofiness there with how all those rounding points interact with each other. So on any given spell, you'll just have to play around and see how those interact. Let's see. Likewise, things like the cripple line of spells in its various incarnations, very useful. Again, increase the duration, make it land on the first try, so you're not sitting there trying over and over and over again to debuff the boss while he keeps wailing on the tank at full force. On down the line here, if there's any other major things. It's worth mentioning, by the way, Divine Aura specifically does not get a duration increase from upgrades. It will be 18 seconds forever. Just deal with it. The upgrades will reduce the reuse time in a meaningful fashion. but the duration will never go up. Let's see. You can see here, yeah, I upgraded Flame of Light all the way to tier 10 for giggles. This was a good example of how all the motes in the world will not save a bad spell. Now, instead of doing 125 damage, it does about 180, 190 damage, something like that. But you can see its reuse time has gotten all the way down to 14 seconds. Cast time is down to 2. So we can see the total cast time went down by 20%. The damage increases by about 50%. It's got that full minus 150 magic resist. It's going to land every time on most enemies. But boy howdy, it still does less damage than the level 34 nuke. So, yeah, quite the capstone spell there to come online at level 50. Finally. Yeah, finally, yeah. When we get to level 50, you better believe I will be moting the crap out of Shaw's Lethargy. I'm not there yet on this build, but absolutely. Let me switch. Actually, let's go take a look at a different spell list here. A couple of spells I want to bring up on the Cleric list in particular. So, the item creation spells. Let's talk about these. So, things like Hammer of Wrath, or the especially for mages, the upgraded spell will summon the item at the same upgrade tier. So if we upgraded Hammer of Wrath to tier 5, it would summon a Hammer of Wrath plus 5. Now, the base Hammer of Wrath is not a very good weapon, so it wouldn't do much at all. But, actually, some of the mage summoned items are surprisingly good, especially as filler items while leveling to load up on resists or other things like that. Mages can get some real mileage out of their item creation spells if they throw some motes at those spells. Totally valid, I think. But going up the list here, looking for the Echo heals in particular. Oh, because I haven't scribed them. Yeah, we need to. So the Echo spells, notably, get an extra tick very early on in their upgrade process, and an extra tick on one of these is a lot. These guys get huge efficiency upgrades from even minor upgrades. Now, to get another extra tick, you gotta go pretty far into the upgrade process, but that first tick happens fairly early. So totally worth throwing a couple of motes at your Echo spells as a Cleric. Sacred Echo, in particular, it is generally my opinion that this is the best healing spell in the game that is not named Promised Renewal. Sacred Echo is a fabulous spell. Also notable, by the way, Echo spells get an extra tick at, I want to say, rank 2 of spellcasting reinforcement. Again, very beneficial rounding in that regard. So, these spells scale in power very aggressively, very quickly, with minimal investment. The heals over time in general, as we saw, because they get both potency per tick and duration, they kind of scale quadratically, whereas things like superior healing, just direct heals, only scale linearly. Now, the exception to that rule would be the Druid Flowering Heal line of spells. Those specifically do not get duration increases, because an increase in duration there would arguably not be an improvement per se, because they do a couple of small ticks and then get a big fat heal at the end, as opposed to the Echoes that have their big fat heal at the beginning, and then a couple of modest heals on the ticks. So Druid Flowering heals don't get the duration bonus, but they do get the potency upgrades. So looking down the line here at other cleric spells along the way. Actually, there's one in particular I do want to talk about, which is going to be the Blessing line. So Blessing of the Lord Commander, this line, which starts with Blessing of the Page, Squire, Knight, Lord Commander. Awesome spells. Love these spells. These although they are actually classed as heals for their categories, they function more like buffs. The healing on these will not scale with upgrades. So 6 life gain on hit with Blessing of the Lord Commander, that will not change with the upgrades. But, you will get the duration bonus. And it is worth noting, the Blessing spells actually have very, very high mana cost. 1,250 mana to cast Blessing of the Lord Commander is a huge expense. These are some of the most mana-intensive spells in the entire game. In fact, it's pretty normal while leveling that casting your level-appropriate spell in this Blessing line will devour like a third to a half of your mana bar. So honestly, throwing a few motes at these just to cut the mana cost while also boosting the duration, I think totally valid. Just keep in mind you will not get a potency upgrade from these at all. So yeah, we talked about nuke upgrades. We talked about buff upgrades, again, not scaling, just getting duration bonuses. Resurrection spells, likewise, don't really do much. Because there's no XP loss on death anyway, so these spells are all kind of dead in the water. That's probably all we need to talk about on cleric spells. Just looking down the Word of Healing, I'll mention. One of the best spells in the game, honestly. Great mote target. Also, I'll mention, I think Word of Healing is probably, at least for group play, is the best Spellblade spell in the game. Because it is Spellbladeable. It only has a reuse time of 1 second. And it's a 758-point group heal for 425 mana. Until you mote that up, you're going to be getting like north of 1,000 hit points worth of healing for around like 350-ish mana. And remember that Spellblade activation rates are partially based on the mana cost of the spell as a fraction of your mana pool. So the cheaper the spell becomes, the more often you'll be able to Spellblade it. So, yeah, very, very, very high value spell right there. I will take this to tier 10 on my own character on live. I will take it to tier 6 as soon as I get it, and it will be on my list of things to ultimately upgrade to tier 10. But that's me speaking as a very group play oriented, paladin, cleric. I like healing, so that's my play style. Again, just to reiterate from what I said before, you don't have to play the game the way I play the game. Play the game how you want to play the game. Do your own cost-benefit analysis. What makes sense for you the way you play. Obviously, if you're strictly a solo player, group heals don't do much for you. Same thing I'll mention on like the undead nukes. The undead nukes are very, very efficient nukes, as are the summon nukes, especially more so for mages and such. So you get a nice chunk of damage. You make them really, really efficient until you upgrade these. And I'll also mention Ward of the Divine. Again, it's a proc buff, so you need to upgrade it to even tiers. Fully, at tier 8, it should, instead of doing 207 damage, it should be doing around, I want to say like 260-ish per hit. Also, Ward of the Divine has a short duration by default, only 1748 by default. So cranking that duration is just a nice quality of life benefit, I think. This is another one. I will take Ward of the Divine to tier 8 at least, pretty early in the process. Probably tier 10 eventually. Also, speaking about nukes, obviously, if Wizard is your main class, nukes are your bread and butter, by all means. Obviously put motes into your nukes. That's what they're there for Wizards. But, in the case of all the motes in the world can't save a bad spell, if a spell has Al-Kabor in its name, it's probably not worth putting motes into. I don't know why, how did Al-Kabor get so famous as a wizard, despite all of his spells being so terrible? I don't know. One of those great lore questions for the history of EverQuest. Come on, Al-Kabor, get it together. Or, I don't know, maybe he's just kind of a jerk, and he kept his good spells for himself, and he just handed out really crappy spells to everybody else to just to troll them or something. I don't know. But let's talk about Enchanter for a second. Let's talk about Enchanter, because if you held a gun to my head and asked me what is the best class in the game, I would say Enchanter. Every class in the game brings something to the table. There are no bad classes. But some classes are better than others. And yeah, gun to my head, Chanter is the best class in the game. And that is largely due in part to this spell right here, Allure. This is the highest level charm spell that enchanters get. So let's talk about this in particular. This spell happens to be at the kind of the confluence of a lot of benefits that make this really, really, really good in the context of EQ Legends. So, Charm historically has a big risk-reward thing going on. As a squishy enchanter, you charm, let's say, an enemy rogue, you give it a bunch of buffs, it does a bajillion damage per second, it just devours everything it touches. But there's always the risk that Charm will break, the thing will turn around and evaporate you because you're a squishy, dress-wearing full caster. Well, here in EQ Legends, you don't have to just be a caster. You could also be a plate tank. You might be an enchanter/warrior or enchanter/paladin or something. And so you actually have the hit points in the armor class to soak that kind of damage at, on demand. So, you also have things like Evasive Stance as well to just completely negate incoming melee damage. If your Charm Pet breaks, you swap to Evasive. If you have like a Rogue or a Ranger or something in your kit, or a Monk, something like that, so you can deal with the potential incoming damage long enough to recharm the pet. Likewise, Allure gets a duration increase. Instead of lasting 1 second short of Leet, fully upgraded, this will last all day, basically. Its mana cost will go down. I mean, it's already very mana efficient for what it is, let's be real. Crucially, though, that 150-point resist adjust by the time you get to tier 10 means this spell is going to land and it's going to stick. Especially till you add Overchannel, which is another 150-point resist adjust. That pet is just yours. This becomes the single most powerful and impactful spell in the game, and it's a distant race for second. People talk about how overpowered Promised Renewal is. Promised Renewal has nothing on Allure. Upgraded, this is the most powerful spell in the game. because you charm a high damage enemy and it just destroys the zone for you. The world is your oyster with this spell. Go grab a rogue, gear it up, buff it up, watch it destroy universes on your behalf. And speaking of Promised Renewal, let's go back to Promised Renewal for a second on the Cleric, because that does bear talking about, I think. So Promised Renewal comes online at level 39. So this is the game's answer to Complete Heal. So it puts a 12-second countdown buff on you. When it runs out, it heals you. By default, it heals for 5,000. And so it is the biggest single hit heal in the game. So the way this operates with upgrades, the mana cost will go down, the healing will go up, the duration will not change because that would be a downgrade. The reuse time will also go down for what it's worth, but you can't recast it on somebody who already has the effect on them anyway, so the reuse going down doesn't necessarily have that much value unless you're trying to, cast it on yourself, then cast it on your pet, or, cast it on two different party members or what have you. So this spell used to cost a lot less mana, and it used to heal for 6,000 when the spell upgrade system was implemented. This spell was basically scaled back so that to get it to its original glory, you had to upgrade it quite a bit. At 915 mana for a level 39 spell, by default, this spell is borderline uncastable when you first get it. Assuming Cleric is on your first kit, you haven't geared up in advance with a bunch of planar armor or anything like that. You're just a regular old level 39 character running around in some, in trash newbie gear. 915 mana is borderline unusable. That's probably half your mana bar for one heal at a time when you don't have 5,000 hit points yet. You need to mote this up a lot to make it good. The mana cost will drop precipitously as you upgrade it. And the healing will scale up aggressively. So this will, by the time you hit, let's say, tier 8, tier 10, something like that, this is going to be healing in the mid 6,000s. And the mana cost is going to drop down to somewhere in like the low 600s, high 500s. So, it will become very, very good, but you're going to have to invest into this spell in order to use it. One piece of feedback I've actually had on this spell, given its current state. Also, by the way, worth mentioning, Promised Renewal does not get affected by any focus effects whatsoever. Improved healing doesn't affect it. Mana preservation doesn't affect it. Every focus effect in the game actually has an exclusion statement that says, if you're casting a spell named Promised Renewal, don't activate the focus. So I think it would be very appropriate, given this spell's new base stat line, because you have to mote it up to make it even kind of vaguely usable. At least usable prior to being extremely heavily geared. I think it would be very appropriate to allow focus effects to work on this spell. And I also think it would be very appropriate to relocate this spell from level 39 up to about 46 or 48. Now, at that level 40-something point, you could actually use the spell right out of the gate. It would be inefficient, but you could use it. Because it won't take half your mana bar. It'll only take a third of your mana bar. And even at a lower upgrade tier of, let's say, 4 or 5, it would actually be usable and worth using. Also, by putting it at, let's say, 48 or anything above 44, it no longer gets full efficacy from a tier 2 focus effect, like, say, the mana preservation 2 focus that everybody goes and farms up in Runny Eye. It would get less efficacy from that. It would encourage clerics to go get tier 3 foci, if they exist, to work on this spell. Because one of, I think, kind of the design problems with this spell, and especially this spell being level 39, is Cleric kind of peaks at level 39, and everything after that feels like small, especially on the healing side, kind of feels like small beans other than Promised Renewal. So, yeah, absolutely a spell that every Cleric will be pouring motes into. Out of necessity, to make it usable at all. Also, other thing I wanted to mention, going back to the Enchanter for a second, Charm does have its effective level increased by Motes. So, Allure is normally capped at level 51. You pump that bad boy up to, let's say, tier 8. Suddenly, it can charm level 59 enemies. Which means if you wanted to go charm, red cons in Plane of Sky, or red cons upstairs on Plane of Hate, you can absolutely do that. Extremely high impact spell. Yeah, sometimes RNG still happens and the, charm still breaks, but you're not just an enchanter anymore. You're also whatever else you are. So you have the tools to deal with those charm breaks long enough to get the pet back under control. And that covers most spells. We'll pop over to Shaman here real quick and look at some of their stuff. Spirit of Puma, great mote dump right there. It is a proc buff, so at tier 10 it gives you the tier 5 version of the nuke. Also, it's a very short duration buff, kind of by design. You suddenly give it a lot of duration, and keeping it up on your group full time becomes a lot more plausible. This spell benefits massively from upgrades. Likewise, your dots get more duration as well as more damage. So, lots of boosts there. Also, Snails healing this line gets potency and duration. These spells don't have the druid effect that the flowering heals have. These are just pure heal over time effects. So they get potency and duration. So again, they get kind of quadratic boosts from Motes. So very high value spells. So that should hopefully give you kind of a what you need in order to build kind of a mental roadmap for how to invest your motes along the way. Whether you want to just bank them all for your level 50 spells, or boost your leveling spells along the way to make the leveling process smoother, that is entirely up to you. That is your own personal cost-benefit analysis. So yeah, I want you to think for yourself. I want you to play the game, the way that feels good for you. But hopefully, you've got some food for thought there to help you come to that decision in a thoughtful and effective way that helps you play better. So thanks for watching. My name's Tim. We'll see you in the next video. Goodbye.